Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on two commanders with partner from Commander Legends, Dargo the Shipwrecker and Jeska Thrice Reborn. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. A more significant way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. For just $1 a month, patrons get early access to scheduled videos on YouTube, while higher tier patrons get access to the VIP section of my Discord server as well. You can find a link to both down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Dargo is a 7/5 giant pirate with trample for 6 generic and 1 red. Thankfully, he has a built-in cost-reducing ability. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact or a creature, Dargo's casting cost is reduced by 2. Not only that, but you can also sacrifice artifacts and creatures as you cast Dargo in order to reduce his cost by 2 for each sacrifice, so it's very possible to actually get him out incredibly early. No small feat since he's a 3-turn clock. Yet, since he's partnered with Jeska, he can potentially one-shot an opponent. With Jeska's zero loyalty ability, she makes target creature deal triple damage to an opponent when it deals combat damage to them. Jeska's other abilities are pretty relevant, especially since Dargo can be recast very easily from the command zone, and Jeska counts herself when you cast her. Her final ability can also actually win us the game on the spot if we're able to combo out, but we'll see that soon. Now, how can we get Dargo out easily? There's many ways to take advantage of Dargo's ability for that. For one thing, we can generate some sacrifice fodder. Wily Goblin costs just 2 red mana, but it creates a treasure when it enters the battlefield. Sacrificing the treasure already reduces Dargo's cost by 2, and it provides the red mana needed to cast him. Using the goblin itself as part of the sacrifice effect of casting Dargo, and it just paid for 5 of the mana needed to cast him. Mock War Marshal also just costs 2 mana, and it creates a goblin when it enters the battlefield. In your next upkeep, if you don't pay its echo cost, it gets sacrificed, reducing Dargo's cost by 2. It also creates a second goblin token. These are 2 more creatures that you can sacrifice to Dargo, effectively reducing his cost by 6. Vessel of Volatility has a built-in sacrifice outlet, so for 2 mana you generate 4 red mana as well as reducing Dargo's cost by 2, in effect paying for 6 of his cost. Other cards that sacrifice themselves for mana like Lotus Petal and Jewel Lotus can also help in casting Dargo very quickly. Both of these are literally free rituals, with the Petal practically giving 3 mana to cast Dargo while Jewel Lotus gives 5. While not technically being a self-sacrificing permanent, Kuldotha Rebirth requires sacrificing a creature just to cast it, so there's a reduction of 2 right there. It then creates 3 goblins. You don't even need to sacrifice all 3 tokens if you don't need to, since this spell already gets a sacrifice. So counting that creature and 2 of the 3 goblins is already a cost reduction of 6 for Dargo. Generator Servant is perhaps the best one since it only needs to tap, so it reduces Dargo's cost by 2, generates 2 more to cast him, and if you use that mana to cast him, he gains haste until the end of the turn. So for just 3 mana you get a hasty Dargo. Playing on curve, casting this on turn 2 and dropping a land on turn 3 means you can activate it and then tap out to get a hasty Dargo, potentially before anyone else even has any blockers. With Phyrexian Altar and Ashnet's Altar, it becomes even easier to cast Dargo. Sacrificing a creature to these already reduces his cost, but the altar generates mana either way when you do. Sacrificing a creature to each altar is enough to be able to cast Dargo. Suffice it to say that these are busted right here. Naturally, actual rituals like Mana Geyser and Ironcrack Feat can do a lot for getting Dargo quickly. Mana Geyser can actually generate way more mana in a multiplayer game, but it's more mid to late game. If you're able to cast Ironcrack Feat very early, then it alone is enough to cast Dargo. Treasonous Ogre can also help getting Dargo by investing life instead of mana. The deck does have a couple of cards to help with gaining life, but try not to dip too deep into your life total since this is a Voltron deck. While you're taking care of one enemy, the others might gang up on you. Runaway Steamkin can also generate mana without investing in mana. Each time we cast a red spell, it gets bigger, and then we can remove +1/+1 counters to generate mana. It does have the potential of becoming infinitely large, which we're going to see soon, so it can either be used to generate infinite mana or deal infinite damage. Dockside Extortionist can also potentially generate a ton of mana when entering the battlefield. However, it doesn't even need to create so many treasures. Even creating 2 treasures is enough. Sacrificing them for mana essentially gives 6 mana for Dargo, while you can then sacrifice Dockside Extortionist itself to complete the casting cost. Besides tokens, you can also use chump blockers to get a fast Dargo early on. The deck's running Rograk Son of Rogoth, Kobolds of Kirkheap, Crookshank Kobolds, and Crimson Kobolds. While these might seem odd choices at first glance, especially in a commander deck, there's more than meets the eye. While true that they're free chump blockers or discard fodder or sacrifice fodder, they're red spells, so they trigger Runaway Steamkin. They're also free non-artifact creatures. That means that they also trigger Cloudstone Curio, and here's where we can appreciate the combos of the deck. While these kobolds are still good on their own, albeit not in a super exciting way, when combined with the Curio, things get crazy. Let's say we just have 2 of these kobolds and Runaway Steamkin. When casting one Cobalt, it triggers the Steamkin. Then when it enters the battlefield, it triggers the Curio, bouncing the other Cobalt. Then you recast it, triggering the Steamkin. It enters the battlefield, bouncing the other Cobalt. Do this indefinitely and you get an infinitely large Steamkin. You can use that to attack a player and eliminate them if it connects. Or you can use that mana to cast Jeska. Use her final ability, removing all of her loyalty counters, sending her back to the command zone. Since you have infinite mana, you can do this infinitely many times, dealing infinite damage to your opponents. You can also do the same with just Dockside Extortionist and one of the Kobolds. If Dockside Extortionist can create at least 3 treasures, you can go infinite. When the Cobalt enters the battlefield, bounce Dockside Extortionist. Use 2 treasures to cast it. Bounce the Kobold when it enters the battlefield. It's going to create 3 more treasures. Notice that the amount of treasures is going to increase by 1 each time. Once you have infinitely many treasures, you can repeat the same ending as before. Cast Jeska infinitely many times from the command zone to deal infinite damage to your opponents. The deck's also running Perforos God of the Forge, which will also kill the table with the infinite enter the battlefield triggers. Either way, Perforos is an amazing card for the deck, since he also has a mana sink that pumps your creatures by +1/+0, so you can use it to not only sink your mana into pumping Dargo, but your other creatures get pumped as well. Going back to ways of quickly getting out Dargo, Hellkite Courser does wonders since it gets Dargo onto the battlefield with haste. Not only is it great for when Dargo gets too expensive to cast and we don't have enough fodder to cast him, but it's also a great card in its own right, being a 6/5 flyer for just 6 mana, so it's all upside. As for more fodder, Kirkkeep can create a Cobalt of Kirkkeep token when needed. Since it's on a mana generating land that doesn't enter the battlefield tapped, it doesn't take up a slot in the deck. Being able to sink our mana in getting a Cobalt token each turn can go a long way in grindier games. Dwarven Mine only creates the token when it enters the battlefield untapped, but being mono red means that we'll have plenty of mountains for that. It's also fetchable, meaning we can get it onto the battlefield when we need sacrifice fodder. Burnished Heart and Solemn Simulacrum are some more synergistic ways of helping cast Dargo. Burnished Heart has a built-in sacrifice effect and it ramps for 2 basic lands when it does. It costs 3 to activate, but at least if you do it in your main phase, it still reduces Dargo's cost by 2 if you have the extra mana to cast him while you're ramping. Solemn Simulacrum doesn't have a built-in sacrifice outlet, but it has no issue with getting sacrifice to Dargo when trying to cast him. Ruby Medallion helps in reducing Dargo's cost as well as other red spells in the deck, so it's a no-brainer to include here, and is pretty self-explanatory. It can also be used to sacrifice Dargo in a pinch if need be. More cost reduction can be found on Foundry, Expector, and Cloud Key. These are included because the deck runs a ton of artifacts in the form of equipment that makes Dargo even scarier than he already is. Ideally, you want to choose Artifact for the key since Dargo already has built-in cost reduction. In fact, this is why Great Furnace and Darksteel Citadel make up lands of the deck. Tapping and then sacrificing any of these to Dargo effectively help pay for 3 of his casting costs. Being lands means they take up no space in the deck and are great for that least expected boost in acceleration to cast Dargo. Same goes for the other mana rocks in the deck, Mox Opal, Mana Crypt, and Soul Ring. While these are obviously used to accelerate the deck, in a pinch you can tap them for mana and then sacrifice them to help cast Dargo, so these can be used to cast Dargo even faster. Sometimes this is a surprise play to get the win. Koth of the Hammer and Chandra Torch of Defiance are also included to accelerate mana. Koth untaps a mountain and then reanimates it. Keep in mind that it doesn't give it haste, but you can tap that mountain for mana, animate it, tap it again for mana, and then sacrifice it to Dargo. That alone gave you 4 mana for his cost. Either way, Koth's middle ability can also generate a lot of mana in the mid to late game, so that might be enough to cast Dargo as well. Koth's emblem isn't that difficult to achieve, and if you do, you can use your mountains to finish off opponents or to ping to death any potential blockers to make sure that Dargo gets all of his commander damage through. Chandra generates 2 red mana while also gaining loyalty. However, you can also use her to impulsively draw a card, ping a creature for 4 damage, which gets rid of hate bears and any blockers. Her emblem is also relatively easy to obtain, but isn't the point of running her. Dargo does have trample, which means that he can't really be chump blocked, but having 7 power means we want to try and beat a 3-turn clock as often as possible, preferably less. To that end, let's see how the deck makes Dargo even more dangerous. Loxodon Warhammer gives him +3/+0 and lifelink. It falls just shy of making him a 2-turn clock. However, being a 10/5 trampler with lifelink could go a long way in getting us ahead in life in case we get ganged up on, and it gives us fuel for Treasonous Ogre. Embercleave and Inquisitor's Flail do a slightly better job at making Dargo a 2-turn clock. Embercleave is practically free if we also swing in with a bunch of the weenies in the deck, and it gives Dargo +1/+1 and double strike. That's 16 damage if he makes it through. The Flail is even better since it doesn't technically give double strike. That means that it can work on top of it. If Dargo has double strike when equipped with this, then he'll more than likely be a 1-turn clock. He does receive double damage, but that's fine if you end up taking out an opponent. Kedis Emberclaw Familiar helps spread the love. Whenever you hit an opponent with Dargo, the rest of your opponents also get burned. Unfortunately, this is not commander damage, but focusing on a single opponent with a Voltron deck is pretty risky anyways, so being able to focus on an opponent and also hitting the others is amazing, especially if you need to get around pillow fort effects. Being Voltron also means protecting Dargo, so Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves are obviously included, not only for the haste but for the protection from targeted spells and effects as well. Keep in mind that if he's equipped with the Greaves, he can't be equipped with anything else after that because of the Shroud. Hall of the Bandit Lord is also included because giving Dargo haste is just so strong. Being on a land means that it doesn't take up a slot. However, we do need to pay 3 life each time we use it, but it's worth it to get a hasty early game Dargo. Going back to protective equipment for Dargo, Commander's Plate is a given. It protects him from everything except red and colorless spells and effects. It also makes him unblockable except by red and or colorless creatures. Not only that, but he also gets +3/+3, again making him just shy of a 2-turn clock. Dark Steel Plate and Shield of Kaldra also protect Dargo by making him indestructible. As a bonus, these equipment are also indestructible, making both themselves as well as Dargo survive mass board wipes as well as artifact hate. Even though it's relatively easy to recast Dargo, it's not that way if we have no sacrifice fodder. Conqueror's Flail doesn't give a huge boost since the deck is monocolored, but having it equipped to a creature shuts down opponents during our turn. So when we attack with Dargo, we don't have to worry about any surprise combat tricks. Rogue's Passage is included because even though Dargo has trample, it's preferable to have his entire power go through when hitting an opponent. It's on a land, so it doesn't take up a slot either. Same goes for Labyrinth of Skophos. This one doesn't make Dargo unblockable, but it does remove a blocker from combat. So if he's only blocked by a single creature to buffer the hit, you can remove it and make him go through with all his power. We can even use our card advantage to help out with casting Dargo. Ichor Wellspring, Chromatic Star, and Chromatic Sphere can all draw us a card when they go to the graveyard, with the Wellspring cantripping when it enters the battlefield. The eggs require a mana to activate, but they give that mana back, effectively each reducing Dargo's cost by 2. So while this might not seem so significant, we're essentially drawing a card for cheap while also accelerating Dargo. Magus of the Wheel sacrifices itself for the wheel effect, so if done with an empty hand, hopefully we can draw into some mana generation or free creatures to make it even easier to cast Dargo. In any case, wheels help us while also potentially disrupting opponents, which is why Reforge the Soul and Wheel of Fortune are also in the deck. Again, nothing special here, they're just solid ways to refill our hand with goodies. Other smaller wheel effects are actually loot effects in the form of Faithless Looting, Thrill of Possibility, Tormenting Voice, and Cathartic Reunion. Since there are so many cheap cards in this deck, especially all the zero cost casting ones, Impulsive Draw effects might seem better than loot effects, but this is a matter of preference for me. I just like loot and wheel effects more than Impulsive Draw since it's harder to deal with exiled cards than cards in the graveyard. Plus, I actually have the cards in my hand, but that's a topic for another day. Valikit Awakening is another wheel type effect, only it's one-sided and on an instant. The best thing is that the cards go to the bottom of the library, so you don't really lose them. However, the best thing of all is that it's a land on the backside, so it doesn't take up a slot in the deck. War Room is another card draw effect that doesn't take up a slot since it's on a land. It's a bit steep to pay at 4 at 3 mana, but at least we only lose 1 life when we activate it to draw a card. The final card draw effect of the deck is Skull Clamp. The deck has plenty of 1 toughness creatures that we can easily turn into 2 cards. We can also have this equipped to a creature we're going to sacrifice to draw the cards that way. Speaking of 1 toughness creatures, Imperial Recruiter isn't card draw, but it is card advantage since it's a tutor on a body. Granted, it can only fetch for creatures with power 2 or less, but that's most of the important creatures in the deck anyways. At the very least, he can get Kedis, which we already saw is amazing here, and it can also tutor for Runaway Steamkin, Treasonous Ogre, Generator Servant, Dockside Extortionist, etc. As with every deck, we need interaction. Fortunately, Blood Moon and Magus of the Moon make it incredibly difficult for multicolored decks to interact with us, much less do much about anything else. There's not much to say about these besides the obvious fact of running them in mono-red deck due to the chagrin of the table. They do neuter our utility lands, but it's worth it if we're able to soft lock opponents. While these effects might be very predicted by our opponents, control magic in mono-red maybe not so much. Red Elemental Blast, Pyroblast, Deflecting Swat, and Not of This World are usually unexpected. Not only can the first 2 deal with counterspells, but they can also take out blue permanents. Deflecting Swat turns removal back at opponent's things. Not of This World is also free if it's used to protect Dargo, who has 7 power. Cavern of Souls is also included to protect Dargo from counterspells because nothing's worse than sacrificing a bunch of stuff or hard casting Dargo just to have him get countered. Choosing Pirate is better than Giant since there are a couple of key pirates in the deck as well. As for our own interaction, Chaos Warp is pretty self-explanatory. It can get rid of anything with the risk of giving the opponent something better, but hopefully luck is on our side. Similarly, Blasphemous Act and Vandal Blast are pretty self-explanatory. These are amazing in mono-red decks and are practically auto-included in such. Bonus points when resolving Blasphemous Act when Dargo is indestructible. Shatterskull Smashing is some pretty solid removal as well, especially considering that its backside is a land with the potential of entering the battlefield untapped, so it really doesn't take up a slot in the deck. That being said, it's also a great mana sink. Valikit the Molten Pinnacle is also pretty decent removal against 3 creatures, but it can also be used to hit planeswalkers and players. The deck is running plenty of mountains, so this is sure to go off. It doesn't really take up a slot in the deck, so you might as well include it. However, all of these pale in comparison to Chandra's Ignition, which not only has the potential to wipe the board, but kill off the table as well. It's pretty much a guaranteed win when used on a runaway Steamkin with infinite power, but if used on a beefed up Dargo, it will deal a ton of damage and potentially wipe any blockers off the field. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 5 fetch lands, Ancient Tomb, and Temple of the False God, as well as 16 snow-covered mountains in case anyone's running anything that benefits us for it. The mana base is simple and straightforward. There's already a couple of lands that enter the battlefield tapped, so we don't want any more. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Dargo and Jeska. These commanders don't have partner with, so you can just as easily partner Dargo with Kedis, Tevesh Sat, or even Sakashima instead. Thanks to Commander Legends, there are currently 1,596 potential partner pairs for commanders. However, the synergy between Dargo and Jeska is ideal for this kind of deck because Jeska can make Dargo into a 1-turn clock, which is the best kind of Voltron commander to have. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.